Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out insightsinsound.com for a full list of our podcasts and YouTube series.
My guest is John Cuniberti. John is an engineer, producer, musician,
psychiatrist.
And we're here at, what's the name of this studio?
This is called Opus in Berkeley, California.
Okay, and you are, we were just discussing off camera the fact that you are a longtime East Bay cat.
Yeah. I grew up in El Cerrito, which is the home of Creedence Clearwater. So they were our big brother sort of inspiration to get into the biz.
The ones that broke through.
The band that broke through. If you could break out of El Cerrito, then you're on your way.
I guess back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, the suburbs of the Bay Area were kind of the butt of a lot of jokes.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Right. Well, I mean, we were only maybe a mile or two from Berkeley, which was an epicenter. And we had to take bus rides, usually on Fridays after school, across the bridge to San Francisco to the Fillmore.
Of course.
And I started doing that when I was, I think, 17. And so that would have been, 67, 68. Those 3 years were absolutely pivotal for my exposure to all the greats, the Hendrix, the Zeppelins, I mean, all of them.
Were you already playing music yourself? I mean, what's your musical background?
I started playing drums when I was 15. The old story, we saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan.
Most people of our generation, it was the Beatles. They're to blame for everything.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And I saw them on TV and I went, wow, playing guitar and singing, that looks hard. Then I saw Ringo up there and I said, I think I can do that.
That's interesting. I'm exactly the opposite. I can play anything with strings. Put me in front of a trap kit, and I'm just an orangutan, man. I can't do anything. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where I just gravitated to maybe making a lot of noise. So I think that was like on a Sunday night. I think I went to school the next day. Started growing my hair out.
All right.
And calling myself a musician. And I'm a drummer. I'm going to start playing drums. And it wasn't difficult then to find within a year or so other people like-minded who had been exposed to all of that, picking up guitars and people getting together. In fact, the guy that turned out to be the bass player, Steve Wright. His brother was playing with the Gollywogs, which was the band before the iteration of Creedence Clearwater, right?
Yeah.
And he had a bass guitar and an amplifier.
Ooh.
And Steve said to me, "Hey, come on over to my house. I have some instruments." And we went over there, and he plugged this bass in and made all this noise. And I said, "Well, you want to be in my band?" And we didn't have a band. I had a snare drum.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning.
All you needed was
Steve Wright went on to be in the Great Kin Band.
That's right. That's where I knew the name from. Sure.
Yeah.
And of course, all you needed in those days was some parent to allow you to use their garage for a little while, and
a lot of garages.
I know that your musical history entails a lot of the early punk movement that happened in the East Bay, in particular, and I'd like to talk about that period a little bit because that was very transitional, both musically and at the same time there was a lot of technology transitioning happening during those years. And what strikes me about it, having been through this myself, is that it was almost a dichotomy of, in one way, our technology was advancing, and yet punk was almost a statement of like, fuck it all, tear it all down.
Yeah.
How was that? I mean, for you getting involved as a musician, were you already involved in electronics at that point, in technical stuff as well?
Well, what year are we talking?
Well, we're talking late 70s, early 80s at that point.
Okay. Well, by the late 70s, I had already transitioned out of being a musician and wanting to become a recording. I was interested in what goes on behind the glass. And there was some moments in my history that led me to make that decision. Primarily witnessing a record getting made. Where I was a witness to the functions of a producer and an engineer in a studio environment, and it really clicked with me, because as a drummer, I didn't write, I didn't sing. So as a drummer, you learn your parts, you play your parts, and then what do? You just basically sit back and let the whole other thing unfold.
But did you have a penchant for the technical aspect?
I did.
Okay.
And it was funny. It's born from my fascination with sound and how I gravitated to music at really an early age, because I always found it kind of magical. And in fact, I still do. Mm. I was in the grocery store the other day, and on comes, through a little speaker in the ceiling, a song by the Supremes. And I remember walking along, looking at the olive oil. That's what I was there for, buy olive oil. I remember sitting there standing there looking at this and thinking, wow, what a great record. What a great song, what a great singer, what a great production. And it's just coming out of this little speaker. Yeah. And I'm thinking, I'm still really turned on and excited by that thing that I heard in the backseat of my parents' car on vacation, coming out of that little mono speaker on the dashboard. That magic, that thing, what is that? How do they do that?
And that's the performance aspect of it. And I want to get into that in a moment too, because that's really important, especially with, when we start talking about some of the stuff you've been doing in more recent years. But I am interested in that whole transition, both on a personal basis, because it happened to me too. Yeah. Where the left brain and the right brain kind of split off. Now drums in particular are in a certain sense very left-brained, more so than a lot of other instruments. There's a lot of technicality going on there in that sense. But I'm always fascinated by what it is that cues you to all of a sudden say, you know what, I'm interested in this aspect of it, in the technical aspect of capturing the sound as opposed to creating the sound.
Right. Well, one of the bands, when you start off as a child, really, in grammar school or junior high school, I guess in my case, you put bands together and you give them names. They all have silly names, and then you end up playing the high school dances, and then you work your way kind of up the food chain. By the time you graduate high school, you're either on your way to college, or you are fully committed to being in a band trying to pay your bills. Because by now your parents are going like, I don't know what's going on with him.
I feel seen.
Yeah. So by then I was in a band, a rock band, 3-piece, sort of British blues influenced, and who later, with a lead singer named Eddie Mahoney, who later became Eddie Money. Eddie Money.
Sure.
Right. So he was our singer. He had just come from New York, so he was kind of, in a way, exotic. The way he talked, his swagger, and all that. So it's like, he's very different than us, Anyway, I was in a band with him called the Rockets. And we had sort of worked our way up the Bay Area club scene to a point where people started paying attention to us. And this guy that used to work for CBS Records in San Francisco when they were there, he was, I believe, an engineer. He came and saw us and offered us studio time. He said, I want to make a demo with you guys, but we can't do it at CBS in San Francisco because I can't work outside of the system. That's how things were then.
Sure.
Record companies basically ran everything. They ran the studios, and they ran everybody who was working in the studio. The directives, like, you cannot go record another band. Even though you're just an engineer here and you're on salary, you cannot go find a band and record them without our permission.
Okay.
Well, he had a friend who had a studio, I guess what you would call a home studio, even then, 16-track, in Ojai, California, down by Santa Barbara. So he says, come on down. for the weekend, and I'll record your demos. So we go down there. That guy turns out to be Tom Lubin. Now, I don't know if you know who Tom Lubin is. He went on to write some very definitive books about recording technique,
Yes.
and equipment specifically. Really great guy.
Some of his books are actually college textbooks now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Really wonderful person. He's since moved to Australia. Anyway, he takes us into a studio, and again, like I mentioned earlier, played the drums. Now I'm sitting back and watching Tom do magic. All those things that I tried to understand and imagine what was happening when I was listening to it as a 8-year-old in the backseat of my parents' car driving down the road. I'm now beginning to understand and see how that is being done, the alchemy of it all, and how important it is, and how absolutely necessary it is to be able to know how to do that in order to make it come out a small speaker and entertain people.
And sound good.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that was kind of what clicked for me. That was when I thought, being in a band, being a drummer in a band is pretty sketchy. I mean, as far as
Yes.
far as having a career.
Yes.
I mean, you're going to go through a lot of bands. You're going to go through a lot of ups and downs. And, the guys that make it are like the 1%ers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, that's brutal.
Yeah.
If you play guitar, we'll assume you also sing. We'll assume you can also write.
Then you have a 3% chance.
Yeah, then you have like a 3% chance. Exactly. So I said, no, I'd be more, because I'm so fascinated with the sound and the technology. I think what I can bring to the party is my enthusiasm for sound. I just thrive in the environment of sound and audio. That's what I wanted to do.
Well, and that's interesting, because I think one of the most important skills for an engineer or a producer is the ability to listen. And I don't just mean listen to the humans making the music, which is important, but to be able to sort of hear where things go, where they should go, pre-production, so to speak. So I think it's interesting that you had a nose for, or ears for that, early on, basically.
Yeah, it was, and I still do.
Well, clearly, yeah.
I wouldn't be in the business today if I didn't still have that enormous enthusiasm for what Joe Satriani said to me once. He says, you take what's inside my head and make it come out speakers.
Yep. And I think a lot of that does have to do with the psychologist aspect that you were mentioning before.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I learned early on working in the studio, watching over the shoulder of some of these really amazing producers, Phil Ramone and Don Was and people like that, was the idea that a lot of what they do is almost not musical at all. It's getting inside the artist's head and helping them to realize this vision that, definitely, they don't know what it's going to be yet either. And you're just sort of throwing things up there and saying, okay, will this work? Will that work? And I think a lot of that comes down to the ability to listen on so many levels.
Right. Yeah.
You found you had an affinity for that early on?
Oh, absolutely. And I thought, because like I mentioned, I wasn't, I mean, I can play a little guitar, but I never, I'm not like a musician producer type of guy.
Okay.
Guy that can sing and write and play on his own, make his own records, and then walks into a studio with a bunch of people who might be struggling to try to figure out what they're doing, and then offer all these suggestions and ideas, and actually may even play some parts and handle all the arrangements and
Heavy
maybe
fingerprint.
rewrite the lyric.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those guys. I come from an engineering background. What I try to do is take what they do and make it work through the technology that's available. Now, you mentioned the punk scene. I gravitated to that because prior to becoming full-time recording engineer where it's like a career and I actually can pay my bills.
Uh-huh.
I worked in live sound.
Wait a minute, that's possible?
It became possible, but I would say it took me 5 hard, long years to get to a point. And Tom said to me once, I just reminded myself of it, John, you're going to have to make a lot of bad sounding records before you're ever going to make a good one. So
Absolutely.
just get with it.
Absolutely.
Because, like a lot of guys, I just would hammer and hammer and hammer at something.
Learn by doing.
And and I would go, why doesn't my stuff sound like the stuff I hear on the radio?
Yeah. And you'd put that up and then you listen to that and you listen to yours. And
It'd drive me crazy.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And, doing live sound was really a great opportunity. And it taught me a lot that skills I still use. Well, I guess we'll probably talk about the one mic stuff
Yes.
I do.
Yes.
But a lot of the skills I got from doing live sound, I'm actually applying there, which is,
Of course.
live one take situations where you got to get it right the first time. It was a
Yes.
great training ground. So I got involved with working with PA companies, and because I was always fascinated with sound and my skill set seemed to be with balance. I was able to balance. They would always say, you mix, because we don't know how to do that. We know how to set these things up. We know how to do all the wiring. We know how to create a business that pays its bills, and we know how to fix the trucks. They can do all the other stuff that's as important. But they said, but John, you do the mixing because you seem to know how to do that. I was just like, well, okay. So that was how I started getting behind consoles and actually being allowed to do stuff. It was doing it through live sound. So I've worked my way.
So you're doing more live sound than studio at some point?
Oh,
or?
I did nothing but live sound for
see.
maybe 5 years.
Okay.
When I made
that explains a lot.
Well, yeah, because when I decided as a drummer that I didn't want to be a drummer anymore, that I wanted to make records. There's no training for that. Where do you go? Well, where do you go? You go get involved with a live sound company.
Pretty much, yeah.
There you're working 3 or 4 nights a week, consoles.
Yeah. And
speakers.
You have one song to get, 24 channels or whatever it is up and running.
Microphones.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of like all the same stuff.
Yeah.
You know? So
But
I could hit.
You have that necessity of getting it right immediately.
And you had to get it right immediately. And, it really separated the men from the boys. I mean, there was a lot of very, very tense, high-pressure situations I found myself in. Mm-hmm. Skills, ultimately, that I would learn and use in the studio under other circumstances.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. But in a live situation, it always seems more dire.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So when I found myself in sketchy situations in control rooms with a band, I knew
it was like
it was never as bad
right.
as those nights when half the stack went down in front of 10,000 people.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, you obviously didn't start out with punk because punk didn't really rear its head until like late 70s-ish, right?
Yeah.
But let's go back to that point that I was asking about before, because at that point you're now fully ensconced in the technical workings, and you're confronted with a whole different kind of music, not in the sense of, I mean, obviously, if you come from a background of being musical, then you take the time to make sure these people tune and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But there's still an ethos there of just like, I don't want to do 20 overdubs. I want it to just be raw, come out. So that experience obviously lent itself to that as well, didn't it?
Yes, because a lot of, if you're growing up in the late 60s, a lot of the music was pretty raw.
Yes.
I mean, I was one of the privileged people to actually see, like the Kinks live. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were essentially a punk band.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot
of the originals.
I mean, on any given night, Jimi Hendrix could be considered a punk band.
Sure.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if you spent time at the Fillmore, you saw a lot of ragged performances, whether it's Janis Joplin or the Dead or any of those things, that later bred what we called, punk. But for me, technically, I didn't see any huge deviation there. There was there were the political overtones that the Sex Pistols, for instance, brought to it.
Yeah.
The Ramones and what was going on in New York, they brought a whole other kind of aspect.
Sure.
To the performances and let me put it this way, what mattered to them.
Right.
On stage. The debauchery was certainly a part of it.
Well, and we had an interesting scene here in the Bay Area too at that point. You know, you had Dead Kennedys and Flipper and, really, again, different from the New York scene.
Yes.
Because San Francisco has to be different.
Right.
Well,
I didn't really know anything about the New York scene at all. I wasn't interested in those records particularly, although I really loved the first Sex Pistols records. I always thought, I don't know what these guys are doing, but I like it. I didn't understand it, but it was like the energy I was drawn to. But technically I wasn't at all, right? So I was more into, records that sounded good, at least in my opinion, records that sounded good. And so then when I started to transition out of live sound into studio, that was, the first step was my old bandmate from the Rockets days with Eddie, Dan Alexander, right? Decided he wanted to open up an 8-track recording studio in a grocery store of all places.
Yep.
Corner grocery store, mom and pop store up in the hills in Richmond, near where I lived. And he went out and bought and sold a bunch of equipment, and he was a guitar dealer at the time. He was buying and selling vintage guitars, electric and acoustics, and he sort of moved into the recording equipment, because by then, by the late 70s, recording studios as we know them now started to emerge. They were no longer beholden to a record company.
Right. They were independent on their own, and they were booking whoever would come in and pay the bills.
Independent recording studios became they were everywhere. So he decided he wanted to open up a recording studio, and he needed help. So I went up there, and he didn't have a board. Well, we had a little board, and it didn't work very well. So one of the consoles that we used for in my live sound company, it was a Midas console. I brought it up there, and we hooked it up, and that was what we used to start recording bands with.
Interesting.
And we had an old 8-track Scully tape recorder, and I learned, and Tom Lubin came over and taught us how to cut tape, how to use a compressor. We started doing this, and within the first year or two, the Dead Kennedys show up. And that was where I first met them. And that was when I first cut my first, punk record. I think I did Police Truck, I think was the first thing I had recorded.
So for you, this was basically just another form of rock in that sense. Yeah.
I mean, they came in, they're perfectly prepared. Cut
actually
everything.
A really tight band.
Oh, they were.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they
By
played all
standards,
the time.
of who was around at that point, they were one of the tighter bands.
Absolutely. So they came in, they cut the tracks. Biafra did his vocal, I believe, and that was it. And I never saw him again. They just went off. They were cutting singles, I think, at the time.
Yeah.
I think California Uber Alice and Holiday for Cambodia, they had already recorded those. They may have even released them, or I think I might have actually worked on a little bit of Holiday. I think I might have worked. I can't remember. It was a million years ago. Yeah. So anyway, that was where I was introduced to them. Then around 1980, Dan meets up with Michael Ward which became Hyde Street Studios, and a guy named Tom Sharpless, who worked for Atari, the company that was now making these really cool tape recorders.
Right.
And the three of them got together and they took over the old Wally Heider studio in San Francisco and they called it Hyde Street Studios. That was like 1980. And so I wound up there as staff engineer.
Those were interesting rooms too. That was kind of a studio that was almost an accidental studio in certain ways, you know.
Yeah. So one of the first clients, Dead Kennedys. They showed up to do their first record. It was going to be called Plastic Surgery Disasters. I believe this was 1980, 81, somewhere around in there. And they said, well, we need an engineer. Can you do it? And I said, yeah, I'll do it. So because they had known me from the previous recordings I had done at the little 8-track place. So I did that. I finished that record for them. And then they came back a year later and we did Frankenchrist, and then maybe a year later I did their last record, which was Bedtime for Democracy. So I ended up essentially recording and mixing the last 3 Dead Kennedy albums.
So for stuff like that, obviously this whole idea of basically tracking for the mix, you know, committing and what I feel is so overlooked, that the idea of pre-production, those are big aspects of this for you then, right?
Well, I mean, there were a couple of things going on simultaneously for me at the time. I was considered, quote unquote, chief engineer of Hyde Street at the time, but I was also managing the place.
Booking and stuff like that? And booking it and
yeah,
whatnot?
just sort of like running the day-to-day of it.
Oh boy.
And I was also working on other people's records. The first Joe Satriani record I did there. Simultaneously, while I was working with the Dead Kennedys, the dichotomy between those two acts is insane.
I was going to say, now he had a band, the Squares, at one point. Was this post or pre that? Or?
This would have been post the Squares.
Okay. Because I remember we opened for them a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the first year of Hyde Street, of working at Hyde Street, I recorded quite a bit of Squares material.
Okay.
Like almost 2 albums worth of material with them, with Joe. And that's how Joe and I got to know each other, and how we ultimately built the trust necessary for me to go on and help him with his career. But so the Dead Kennedys really a fine-tuned live performance band. They would come in. We could cut an entire record in a week or two, a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Fairly short, small budgets. When I did the second album, they had a bigger budget and they wanted to experiment more. Well, by now I had already done Joe's first record, and those records were just Joe and I in the control room with tons of toys to play with. And it was a completely different mindset than recording a Dead Kennedys record.
So I mean, you were obviously tracking drums and stuff before you camped out in the control room, right? I mean...
Well, no, we used drum machines.
Oh, really? Oh, so everything was just in the box?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we later transitioned to live drums when Joe could afford to hire a drummer that he could trust.
Okay. Uh-huh.
I mean, there were... We did what we probably call a hybrid now, where we'd use kick and snare, and then we'd
do the live hi-hat and stuff.
We would do live hi-hat and cymbals and stuff, because the samplers in those days were pretty
awful.
Yeah, for high frequencies weren't really great. And since I was a bit of a hi-fi nut, I go, no, we got to go in and play the cymbals live. And Joe would go, why? It's on the machine. So, we went through the sort of very meticulous and frustrating process of MIDI and laying live drum performances over machines. It was really...
it was the Wild West in those days too, as far as that technology went.
Yes, it really was. And we kind of just did it for ourselves. I mean, I always thought when Joe and I was making those first couple of records, even Surfing with the Alien, I was thinking, man, nobody's going to ever listen to this record.
Yeah,
I was doing the Dead Kennedys records. You do them and other bands like that, they get heard.
Yes.
You know,
Fair point.
I mean, I knew when I was making that record that, you know, they're going to sell 15, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 of these records.
Yeah.
You just know it while you're making it. You know these records will be heard. They will be played. They will be toured. And they will go out.
Yeah.
And they will be there. But with Joe, it's just like, sometimes it's like, why are we even doing this? I'm doing it for you, Joe. Because because the first record, he didn't even have a record deal. You know?
But it was a hell of an education for you, no doubt.
It was a fantastic
making all that
education.
stuff fit together, making all those moving parts work.
It was well,
especially back then.
it was my dream.
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to be able to manipulate sound in a way that would entertain people. And Joe took care of all the music. I didn't have to like give him any input on that. You know, like what to play, how to play it.
Right.
I could say that's a better take than that one.
Sure.
You know, I could help him in those ways. I'm talking about the early days.
Sure.
This is what the function I played was really, like I said earlier, taking what he heard and make it come out the speakers, because he didn't know really anything about the studio at the time.
No, you were the interface between him and the technology.
I was the interface between me and the technology, and the technology was changing.
Absolutely.
When we first did the very first record, there was no automation at all. Everything was done at the console. He would sit and these would be his 10 faders. These would be my 10 faders. And we worked our way through the mixes, and I cut tape to make it all work. And
sometimes if it was really complex, you'd mix a section and then mix a different section and splice them together.
Yeah, we would do it in sections, and I would cut the tape, and funny things would happen.
Right. Or you'd have these great mix sessions where you'd have 5 people crowding around the console, and you have these channels, and you have... it was...
that was how things were done then. And with Joe is very meticulous, because we were doing one track at a time. So I could experiment with microphone preamps. I mean, up until then, really, you just used the consoles. Right. Whatever the consoles did is what we used. Well, sometimes I'd go, well, what about this? What about that? What about that box over there? What about this thing? What if I do this? You know, I was able to experiment a lot more with him than I could with a fully functional band that would come in and you know, if you were any good at what you did, it would start sounding like a record within, I don't know, 20 minutes.
Well, and that's your live experience.
Fully realized record within 20 minutes. You push the faders up and go, holy crap.
That's your live sound experience, though.
That is,
yes.
Exactly. And how you can work fast. And I think the DKs really kind of understood that about me, that this dude works fast, we're going to save money.
Yeah, yeah.
And he doesn't get too involved in the music part of it. He's just making what comes out the speakers really cool.
Well, I think there's also a certain value to that, because you get it while it's still an impulse.
Yeah.
As opposed to working it to death.
Right.
You know, and that, I think, is really productive for a lot of the artists.
Yeah. And with Joe, it was really just the opposite. We did one track at a time, and although it might have been in his head, certainly wasn't in mine. I had no idea what we were constructing at the time until it became, once we got a lot of it down, I started to go, okay, I see where you're headed with this. How about if we do this? How about if we do that? How about if we put a delay on this and maybe some reverb on that and maybe keep this dry? And you go, okay, well, do whatever you want to do.
But did he come in with the ideas more or less fully formed in his head?
He had the music fully realized.
Interesting, because very few artists are really capable of that, you know. And I'm always fascinated by these people who can hear it all.
Well, they're not encouraged to anymore.
Absolutely, and that's part of the challenge now, is that perfection is well, first of all, it's overrated, as we know.
Right.
But that's actually a nice segue into your one mic projects. You have been for several years now doing this, and the concept here is exactly as it sounds. You stick one mic in front of a band and you let her rip. And I'm curious about a few of the aspects of that. Now, you know, obviously, you know, people like Rudy Van Gelder and Al Schmidt, you know, people have been doing these kind of recordings for a long time. And a lot of it comes down to just the dynamics of teaching the musicians step forward, step back, etc. But how do you achieve depth with one single sound source?
It's done through the ambience of the room. The room itself has a huge say in the outcome of these one mic recordings I do.
Of course.
It has probably as much to do with the total effect, if you will, than the choice of microphone. Although technically the microphone has to be able to do certain things, but I'm talking sonically here. The room has a lot to do with it, and where you layer. You know, when we mix a lot of dry, flat tracks that have been recorded, maybe even in different locations, with or without ambience applied to them at the time of recording. Let's just say they're all dry. A good mixer, when they start a mix, they have a vision of how the depth will be applied.
Put this room on those things, put that room on the other things, and sort of blend them. Yes.
What is important at the moment? What do we want people to listen to? What needs to come forward in the mix to keep people's attention while these other elements are going on that support that one thing? That one thing is what you need to focus on, but there's other things going on that support it.
Okay.
So depth becomes as much a function of delivering the message, right? So, typically with multi-track recording, it was done through reverbs. Early on, the idea, and that's why if you go into studios that were built in the late 60s, pretty much studios that are built through the 70s, they're all dead. They're all pretty dead.
Yes.
Everything's dead. Put microphones very close to things. We'll worry about the depth and the reverbs and all that later, because now we have boxes that can do all that.
Okay.
Prior to that, and still today with orchestra recordings, that's not the case. It's all about the placement of the mic in a room, juxtaposition with a musician in the room someplace, and how it all works together. Because the marriage of the instrument in the acoustic environment can create a mood, and it can add to the amount of attention you want to put on it. In other words, if you move a mic close to something, it will feel closer to the listener when it's played back. I mean, it's a very simple concept, but that's basically how it works.
But it's more than just louder, though, as you say. It's a dimensional thing, right?
Yes, it's dimensional, and your control, again, the goal is to entertain. And so you got somebody with a great song. You want to portray that in a way that the listener can hear the lyric, can understand what the song is about, and be invited into the world of this singer-songwriter, for instance. So where the microphone is placed, how the instrument is placed in the room, all that is essential. So, I could go on to why I started doing it. I mean, I don't know if that's... If you want to get more technical, I can get more technical about it.
I mean, it's more than just the why, though. The why to me is almost clear. I mean, I see what you're trying to accomplish, which is essentially to bring out the artist rather than the recording. I'm fascinated, though, by some of the technical aspects of it because it's so antithetical to what we do now. And you mentioned using the room. Now, I'm curious as to how much, if any, effect you put on after the fact or anything like that. I remember having a really interesting conversation with, what's his name? Stephen Miller, who started the Windham Hill stuff. And one of the things that he was telling me was that as a young child, he walked around these symphony halls and listened to how things sound over here versus, and then he would take like these George Winston recordings, for example, and he would play with different reverbs and different EQs on the reverbs and different delays on the reverbs. And he said, people said, well, this is multi-tracked, right? He said, no, it's all live to 2-track. And I'm fascinated by the fact that some of these one mic recordings that you have put out there, they have a certain depth that almost sounds like, no, you didn't get that out of the room, did you? So I'm curious as to how, from the technical perspective, how you're accomplishing this, making it sound so big from one sound source.
Right. Okay. Well, I have to kind of explain what my goal was when I did when I first did it. The first one I ever made, I thought, can it be done? I wanted to know if it could be done. I didn't know if it could be done because I grew up in a multi-track environment.
Sure.
That's how records are made. People come in, put headphones on, they got their own mix, stick a microphone in front of their stuff, they can come back Thursday and redo it.
Right.
There's a safety net now with digital and multi-track recording that is born now into the process. I mean, it's just...
Oh, and even more so now with digital.
And in some ways it really kind of encourages laziness, but I don't want to get into all of that.
Yeah.
That's the psychological effect that it's played on music that I'm resisting at this stage of my career.
And we will come back to that because there is some stuff on that I want to talk about.
Okay.
But okay.
Yeah. So
the first one was proof of concept, basically.
Well, yeah, I was recording a band in a conventional way, multi-track, and I said to them at some point, "Hey, would you guys ever be interested in coming in and recording a song, one of your songs, just around one microphone, because I have this new microphone I've got, this AEA R88 stereo ribbon microphone that can record stereo in 2 fields, the front and the back." And I thought, well, if I have a front and a back stereo field to work in, I could put stuff over here and I could put the drums over here. I can move stuff in and out, and maybe I could actually get a balance around this microphone, because up until then I was using the microphone for room mics, for a conventional drum setup,
dynamics on the drums and condensers above and blah blah blah.
Yeah, or drum overheads. I used it for drum overheads. Piano, I've used it in the conventional sense that you'd use a stereo ribbon microphone. But I thought, it's very interesting that you can have a stereo field to work in, 90 degrees on one side of the microphone. But there's also one on the back side because these are bidirectional ribbons. And I thought, man, with that much real estate, what's keeping me from putting the drums on one side, moving the mic in and out until I get the drums to sound really great with one mic? And we all know that it's possible. Well, I grew up with records where it was just maybe one microphone on drums and they sound perfectly fine.
Sure.
But if the drums aren't the most important thing, what's important is the singer and the songwriter, then it won't even matter really if that snare isn't really cracking like it would if it had a close mic on it, or the kick isn't. None of that's really important, because what I'm really trying to sell is the singer and the songwriter.
Right. Nobody goes home humming the snare.
Yeah,
right.
I'm not going to worry about that.
Yeah.
So let's put the mic here, get the drums in where they sound good and they sound balanced, and they're stereo, right? Well, now where do I put the bass amp? Well, I want it in the center, because what I'm trying to do is recreate a conventional sounding recording.
Right.
I wasn't trying to make a recording that sounded like somebody put a microphone up in a rehearsal studio to record the band rehearsing. We know what those sound like. They're unbalanced.
God awful, yes.
Yeah, I wanted to try to get it to a point where even somebody who understands this couldn't tell that it was done with one microphone.
That is exactly my question, is how you are accomplishing that with this single sound source.
Well,
it's actually, I guess the way, when you put it that way, is really almost 4 sound sources, because stereo front and back, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're really making the most of that aspect.
Yeah,
of
I would not be able to do this with a stereo microphone.
Okay.
Like some people say, well, why don't you use like a a
C24.
C24.
Yeah.
Well, you could, because you could put it in bidirectional. There's another reason why I don't use those mics, but why don't you use two condensers, or the conventional stereo type of recording? I said, well, because I'd have to put the entire band in front of one one pair, right? And that's going to be a lot harder to do.
What about mid-side? You ever tried mid-side?
Yes.
And how does that work?
It works great under right circumstances. And there is one of my mics is a mid-side, right? It's the Psychotic Pineapple. The song is called Head Cheese.
Ooh, that's a fun band.
That is a mid-side recording.
Okay, I'll have to go back and listen to that.
The singer's in the center, mid. Everything else is stereo, and everything else is round. It was all done on one side of the microphone.
Wow.
That's the only one I've done like that. All the other ones I had, because it was a grand piano, a choir, and a string quartet. So that I could lay out in the conventional classical way, if you will, and record it like you would an orchestra, like a live performance on a stage.
Right, like you're standing in front of it, basically.
Yeah, but once you start getting drums and live and electric guitars, that becomes more problematic.
Because of the balance of the instruments.
Yes.
You mean. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Right. So so having two stereo fields assures me a better chance of getting the guitar amps balanced, the bass amp balanced. So I have to move the things around in these two stereo fields to get the balances I need. Then the singer gets up to the microphone to make it close enough where it's intimate, like a conventional recording,
but not right on top of it.
But not completely on top of it. But they got to be loud enough, because they're competing now with all this music in the room.
Yeah.
And that's the neat trick, is to be able to, get the singer to be at the level you want them at, and the instruments to be at the level you want them at. That, again, to sound like a conventional recording and not have the room ambience ruin it.
And of course, the singer's got to have some semblance of good mic technique to understand this as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And I have to oftentimes work with the singers, because they're really not used to that.
Well, that was going to be my next question: is how much of a learning curve is this for the artists?
Not as much as you would think. Every act I've worked with adapts to the process pretty quickly.
Because it's so much like live?
Yeah, I think that they're accustomed to playing live. I vet these acts pretty well. I make them send me videos of them playing live, because I have to know. They send me something they cut in their home studios. Like, that doesn't help me.
Sure.
I don't know how long that took. Send me something from a club.
Right.
I don't care what it sounds like. I just want to see if you can get through the whole arrangement.
Right, and without having to overdub anything and all that stuff. Sure.
Yeah. And so they adapt pretty quickly. Because, I'm handling the balance. I make them come in after a take or two, and I'll go, well, what do you think? Do you think... And the guitar player might go, well, I want more delay on my... I think when I go to my solo, it should probably have a little bit more something on it, or whatever.
Okay.
And I said, well, you're going to have to go out and do that.
So you're not using any additional ambience or anything like that when you're... reverb or anything like that when you're recording this?
I do, not when I record it, no.
Okay.
No, when I record it, it's completely flat.
Just off the mic, 4 channels, that's it.
Yeah, I give myself the greatest amount of information, data, if you want to call it that, collect as much data as I can, so that when I move into the mastering process, because it all
Carve it out. Yeah.
At that point, then I can really kind of fine tune it with the tools I have. It's all in the box. It needs to be, because it has to be synced to video. So it's just,
of course, sure.
I got to keep it in the box, which is fine, because the tools that are available now really go a long way to help me do what I do. A good example is, you asked me about me adding ambience. I absolutely do. If the singer is very close, and I want it to sound like a conventional recording, then I may want to add reverb to that voice. right? It's the room I might be in might be pretty dry. The guitar amps may have a little reverb put on them, but on the amp itself, or a delay. So the ambience is being supplied by maybe a foot pedal or the amps themselves. So I have that working for me. I have the ambience of the room for the drums. That can either be a plus or minus.
Right.
But the singer, if the singer is 6-8 inches off the mic, that's going to be pretty dry.
Right.
For some people, that's the presentation, a dry vocal. All right.
Depends on the song.
It depends on the song. But in most cases, I want to add reverb. So, well, if I add reverb, how do I not add reverb to everything?
Exactly. That was my question.
Well, one technique is to take the stereo recording, which is what it is, put it into an MS matrix, turn down, and in doing so, you turn down the sides through within the matrix.
The old vocal isolation trick.
So basically, what's in the center, which is going to be the singer primarily,
right?
Because everything else is kind of like out here.
It's out of phase now.
I can get like 3 to 4 dB of isolated vocal. I send that to a reverb.
Okay.
And then I bring the reverb, I mix
back.
the reverb back up into the other stereo room performance.
That's some serious black magic, man.
Well,
it's cool.
It's a technique. So that's how I would add reverb to a voice. That's about all I ever do. I don't do any editing. It's forbidden. I forbid myself. I forbid the band. I forbid everybody. No editing. The takes are from top to bottom. Most bands get it done in, I've had Jackie Green do it in one take. And I went, I don't think my video guy was ready for that. I'd go to Nathaniel, who was shooting a video. I'd say, Nathaniel, did you get that? And he goes, well, I don't know. I might want to do another take. And I go, Jackie, can we do another take of that? He said, fine. So we ended up using the second take, but got to be prepared.
Yeah.
Because the videographer, he's doing everything in one take too. He needs to know the arrangement of the song.
Needs to know where to be at what time. And
it's a dance. He does.
Absolutely. And he's dancing around with a gimbal and stuff like that?
Yes. And so I get these. So I've some of the one mics are like 2 takes, 3 takes. I would say in general, it's 7 to 9 to 10 takes it takes to get the performance the band likes, a balance I like, and a video representation that my video guy likes. We all have to kind of like pick the take that everything comes together at once. Sometimes I don't know what that take is. I mean, the band usually will say, hey, I think take 7 was definitely the best one, so I'll make a note of that. And then when I go back into post, I have the video, I have all the audio to all the videos. I go through them all and I go, yeah, take 7. I can go with take 7. The video isn't maybe the best one, but I'm always going to defer to the best musical performance, of course, because that's really what we're about. I've never said, well, I'm going to go with another take because I thought the shot was better or the balance of the guitar was better.
But there's no substituting a particular shot from take 5?
No.
Okay.
No, I
so
would never do that.
Okay.
Never.
Interesting.
It's
against the principle of it. I understand that. Sure.
Yes. And some people go, why aren't you using more cameras? You got this one guy moving around. And I go, yeah, because if someone's watching this and it cuts to a different camera, they're going to go, well, there's an edit there. Well, they're going to assume then maybe the audio's edited too. And now we get away from the whole thing. It's like, well, I might as well put microphones on everybody and put 4 or 5 cameras up and shoot a conventional in the studio, boring.
I'm not sure if I agree with that, because I think you could theoretically have a couple of stationary cameras at an angle and then be able to cut to those every once in a while and then still have the camera moving, the main camera moving. I understand your concept here is that you want it to be beyond question.
But Daniel, understand that even now, people question whether or not
Sure.
take me to task on a lot of this stuff. They
Interesting.
say there's no way that this is actually done with one microphone. I had a guy the other day send me a comment on one of the YouTube ones. It was a thing I did up in Oregon with a band called Lynx. Young woman, singer-songwriter, big open ambient room. And he writes something like, there's no way this was done with one mic and one take because I can hear a high female background singer. And I went, wow. And I said, well, that's the keyboard player. It's not a girl. It's a guy with a high voice, and he's off to her right, and he's singing a high harmony. I mean, he really wanted it. He just couldn't believe that what he was hearing was actually. And you know, I find that as actually a compliment.
Oh, absolutely, no question about it.
You know, I mean,
it's a supreme compliment.
Yeah, because that's been my goal, was to get it to a point where people couldn't tell the difference, which gets me back to the point I just wanted to make about why I only use one camera. Because if it's one continuous camera, right, that's my proof that this is one take.
Oh, absolutely. I totally get why you do it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm looking at this from two different angles here. One being the angle of the musician, producer, engineer that I see where you're coming from there, but then I'm also looking at it from the perspective of a videographer.
Oh, absolutely. And listen, would it look better if when you go to the guitar solo, it just goes right to the guy playing some incredible stuff on the guitar, opposed to the camera moving across the room to the guy?
Getting to him, yeah.
I mean, in conventional terms, I suppose on a production, you know, it would be better.
Sure.
But
no, I get it. It's
but
absolutely
but to
true.
me, it's like, well, if I start cutting the video, people are going to assume the audio's cut, and this is like 5 takes cut together, and then what's the point?
Sure.
And that brings me to another point, which is like a lot of the audiophile community have reached out to me wanting the recordings, the audio, and I'm thinking, wow, if I just give these recordings up without the video, which I've never ever thought of ever separating the two, then what are people listening to? I mean, they may know it's from a one mic, but to a casual listener who just walks into a room and listens to music coming out of a speaker, they don't care.
Goes back to my point about what Stephen Miller was saying, you know, that everybody assumed that those George Winston recordings, for example, were multi-tracked.
Yeah.
You know, it really is true that it's just, it's to a point with technology where we have to really prove. And even then, there's some doubt, you know, but you have to at least attempt to prove that yes, as you say, it's genuine, it's authentic, we did this in one take.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm really intrigued by it because I have always felt that one of the things that's really missing is the art of pre-production, of planning everything out ahead of time with the artist. That's the first point. And the second point being what you referenced earlier, which is that technology has made us lazier. You know, there's no striving for that perfect take, and there's no committing, you know, and that I think is, you know, what I've always felt was important was to track for the mix, to get as close as you can right away to what you're going to have, and not end up with 14 vocal takes that you're going to comp. And I know that people do that, and some people do, you know, there are people who make that into an art form. But to me, the idea of a contiguous performance, there's an art to that too. And that really makes the performer work a little bit harder than we have the option for them to do now.
And I think the bands that I've invited into the studio inherently know that. I mean, I send an email to every member, or at least to the leader of the band, and explain to them what I'm doing and the process and why I'm doing it. and they usually bring their A game. They know that they don't get to come back tomorrow and redo their parts.
Right.
And it's a very different atmosphere that I would normally find with a band that rolls in on a Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, we're going to track bass and drums today. Yeah, everything else doesn't matter. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm going to be, you know, if everybody in the room thinks that they can redo their part or at least fix their part, you know, later today, what are they really doing? I mean, they're not really bringing it.
What they're doing is they're doing the work that they should be doing in the rehearsal room before they get there.
Ideally.
Yeah.
Well, and they have bought into the myth that they actually can recreate something that I believe can only happen in a room together with people communicating, having that conversation together in real time at once, that one moment in time, which gets me back to my one mic process, which is this: what you're experiencing. I'm inviting the viewer to come into the room with me and see this thing take place, unfold in its original form. Mm-hmm. And it's going to happen once, and you get to witness it. Something I've been able to do as an engineer, walking in and watching a band perform. It's like I'm the only one there that actually saw this thing take place. Everybody just get that one take. Wow. You know?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I recently posted a little soundbite from an interview I did with Craig Anderton. Mm-hmm. And Craig makes the observation, and this all sorts of people misinterpreted this. There's like 1,000 comments from people saying, no, you know, but he has a very interesting point. He says that before the advent of being able to record music, it was a completely transitory experience. It was ethereal. You had to be there for the performance. Sheet music is not the same thing. Yes, we know what classical music sounded like because it's been handed down, but every single performance is different. Yeah. And what you are doing is basically taking it back to this era of it's an ethereal performance. You have to be there right now, hear it. If you did not hear it, there's no way to you're capturing it, which I think is the entire point here. Is you're capturing that once in a lifetime moment.
And I'll add, the performers, they're so proud of it. When they walk out of the studio after doing one of these with me, they're so proud of it because they've never done it before.
And because it says, look, I can do this, we can do this, and we can create this entire thing in real time.
Because really, what have they been exposed to? What their experience is, they come in, they do their parts, they hand it off to the engineer and the producer. Maybe next week, a month from now, they get the mix, they like it or they don't like it. They become detached from the whole thing. Uh-huh. There's other people involved.
Yeah.
What I always tell people is basically I'm firing everybody. I'm firing the record company, firing the A&R guy, firing the producer, firing the engineer. It's just me and you guys.
And it's up to you to do
right.
I'm
going to facilitate this. Mm-hmm. You can call me the engineer if you want. Okay.
I like facilitator.
But it's more of I facilitate. I teach them how to do it. Mm-hmm. But they're doing it.
They're creating the art, and what you're doing is capturing the art.
The balance between the musicians and the instruments and the singers becomes intimate immediately with them. Uh-huh. Some wear headphones, some don't. A lot of times they end up balancing themselves in the room so well that I'll go, if you want headphones, I'll give them to you. They'll go, no, it feels great. To me, that seems pretty alien to me. I mean, I think if I was playing, I would want to hear the thing loud and, get into it. But they just feel completely, it's like sitting around the campfire with friends and singing a song they love. That's almost the feeling they emanate, And I said, wow, if I can capture that, I'm all for it.
Now, have you taught any of this? I mean, I'm interested in
In a
the
conventional
reactions.
sense? No.
Yeah, I'm interested in the reactions of, we are now in an era where people go to school for this stuff.
Yeah.
You and I came up in an era when there were no schools for it, but now people learn this stuff.
Yeah.
And I'd be really fascinated to see the reactions of students being confronted with this methodology instead of the traditional multi-tracking to Pro Tools, et cetera, et cetera.
I don't know.
No, you haven't actually taught a class on it or anything like that.
Forgive me, but who was the engineer who just passed away, worked out of Blackbird?
Oh, Mark Rubel.
Mark Rubel.
I'm writing a book with him right now, in fact. I've taken over the completion of a book.
He was the only person who ever reached out to me and said, would you come to Blackbird and teach this? And
Really?
we were in conversation for me to do that prior to him getting sick.
Okay.
But he's the only person that ever recognized it as something that would be of
I think that would be wonderful.
value.
Actually, there's a couple of schools that I think would value that, and I'm happy to hook you up with them. I think.
I mean,
it would be,
I am more than willing to help, assist, or teach the method. I get emails, I mean, maybe once or twice a month from people who go, hey, I've seen your videos, I bought the microphone, but this is happening, that's happening, I don't understand this and that, can you help me with this and that? I'm more than willing to give them whatever help they can. And I usually write some pretty long emails explaining a lot of what we spoke today about.
okay, this is fodder for another conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably so. And, I think on my YouTube channel, there are, I don't want to go so far as to say tutorials. I think one is actually called a tutorial, but it doesn't get into any of the great detail, but it gets, the thing is that it's problematic because every artist and their instruments and the way they approach music, how many there are, the room I'm in, all play a huge role in how the thing goes down.
Sure.
So
the character of each of their instruments, the
there
character
may
of
be
the
a-
voices.
there
sure,
may be a methodology to what I do. And there certainly is, and I certainly have refined it over close to 50 of these I've done. There is no recipe though.
Of course not, because you're confronted with completely different ingredients each time.
Yeah, and I get emails from a guy from Argentina. I bought one of these microphones. He took a picture of and I said, well, I think the problem is the room you're in. The room you're in is not going to really allow you to do what I think you want to do. Because he was comparing it to some of the one mics I've done in like conventional recording studios that have a very controlled ambience, ambient spaces, where I can actually move stuff around and by a foot and actually hear the difference. You know,
Of course.
if you're in a big
or even
noise,
just turn an angle, just kip the mic a little bit, and yeah.
yes, I can really begin to control it when it's
Sure.
a controlled ambience. But that's $1 million studio.
Right.
If you take it and put it into a big open noisy room, it's going to be really hard.
I was going to say, I'm thinking, you put that in a barn or a warehouse or something like that. It's
Well,
gonna
there
be-
are some in a barn. I think the most difficult one I've ever done was at Sun Studio in Memphis.
that room. Yeah,
That is
I could see that.
That is
yeah.
one live room. But you know what I did? I brought in a rockabilly band. I figured, well, I'll
What
do
better?
it.
Yeah, slapback.
I'll do it with a rockabilly band. That's what it's supposed to sound like,
Sure.
and that's what we'll do.
Upright bass and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would make sense in a room like that
Yeah,
because it's very
Yeah,
Slappy.
and I thought, well, I want it to sound like Sun Studio. Why else would I have been here?
right.
I
Exactly.
wanted it to be. And then the day earlier, I was at Muscle Shoals, and it's a completely 70s dead studio.
Yes.
And that's what those recordings sound like. Sound like what that room sounds like. So the recordings really sound like the rooms. So you have to know how to control ambience and space and stuff. And that's from years and years and years and years of being a recording engineer.
Right.
This isn't something I could have just walked in and done.
No, again, your live sound experience also
Yeah.
plays into this because you have to scope out each room as you get in there.
Yeah. But I think the big motivator was just my frustration about how modern records are made now.
I could see that. I could see that. Just the idea of, I want the talent to show through rather than the technology.
A friend of mine said to me, he said, John, I see what you're doing. I said, really? What? And he goes, you're taking all the stuff we don't like to do and you got rid of it, and you've left nothing but the good stuff. And I went, well, that's very interesting. Because what I love about being a recording engineer is sitting there and listening to the band get that perfect take.
Yeah. And you've basically
The
put the
overdubs?
onus. Yeah.
I hate it.
You put the onus on the band.
I hate doing overdubs. Mixing, it can go on forever and make me crazy.
Sure.
And I got rid of all of it.
That's true. You basically track it once and you're done.
I'm done. And that's that. I always say to the bands, when they leave, and I said, well, one thing you don't have to worry about is coming back for overdubs or getting mixes you hate. I've taken that all away.
Wow.
You don't have to worry about it.
So I usually wrap with this question, and in your case, it's really applicable because of this dichotomy that we're discussing here between old school and new school. Mm-hmm. Since you came up in such a different era, both the technology, the way we create music now, etc., the final product that we create out of that music now, what would you tell 15-year-old you coming up in this world?
Ooh, what would I tell the 15-year-old? Wow, I don't know. I mean, on a technical level or on a emotional, artistic level?
I think you just answered the question.
Because I would say follow your artistical muse, wherever that leads you. Just if there's something in the business that excites you, go in that direction. And if you're young, like this person would be, say yes to everything. Everything that comes your way, say yes to. And you'll find your way, you'll find your path. Yeah.
That's true, because saying yes usually identifies not only what you do like, but what you don't like.
Oh, so much of my career has been based on me getting involved in things, or being in the right place at the right time, or getting involved with situations that I was really uncomfortable with, that I didn't think was right for me, that turned out to open that little door, crack that door open, that brought me someplace that's really been hugely rewarding, beneficial, rewarding spiritually and beneficial, as as a person trying to make a career of it.
Yeah.
You have to, the less judgmental you are, the better. I would just say, if there's an opportunity, say yes, and see where it'll lead you.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
John Cuniberti, thank you for being my guest.
It's my pleasure, Daniel.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.